Debuting in Medarot 7, this upgraded form of a military dino type is most certainly iconic in design, but packing just a little more under the hood when it comes to power. It is TIR02 Buster-Tyranno, with the kit of Melt, Double Hammer, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Trap Buster, which forcibly removes any traps placed against allies on the field a certain number of times. Now, Buster-Tyranno is a model that's available in Medarot S pretty much right from day one as a 1-star model in the friend point gacha, which means anyone playing longer than just a couple days very likely will have already collected at least 1 or 2 parts to this guy, if not his entire set. But when it comes to cheap and inexpensive, he still definitely holds much like his predecessor Attack Tyranno, and specializing mostly in collateral damage more than consistent damage. Melt on his head is a negative ailment very similar to how Fire behaves with Attack Tyranno, but this is instead the inverse of it. Instead, or rather much like Fire will, Melt will inflict a damage over time ailment effect on the enemies on the opposing enemy when attacking them. That means that over time they will progressively lose just a little bit of HP every tick of the clock, making them progressively easier to break or kill, but it cannot destroy parts itself, as it will only reduce the HP down to 1, and then from there just kind of sit. Which means it'll be very easy for someone to come behind and finish the job once the HP has been whittled down far enough. Hammer on both arms is a conventional melee skill that you really can't ever go wrong with using, even if it is a full AoE. And as a full AoE attack, that does mean it will damage all parts evenly and spread the damage across them equally. That means if it's a fully healthy target, that's a quarter of your total damage per part, or if they're injured or just barely alive, it will equalize the damage across all active parts. The only time this does not come into effect is if it is being intercepted by a shield, or if the enemy has conceal effect on the opposing side, which negates pierce damage for 1 blow. In this instance, all of the hammer's incoming damage will be diverted directly and wholly to the part that is tanking the blow. Biped Legs means that Buster-Tyranno will be relatively solid on most terrains across the board, as arguably one of the most well-rounded legs that you can choose from, with the most diverse set of masteries. And the Trap Buster ability is a very unique touch too, as compared to most other passives which may focus on, say, power or success, or even a conditional damage or success bonus or something of the like, Buster-Tyranno instead chooses to go after a passive that's designed more for coverage. So this is particularly useful mainly against foes that like to use traps to try to trip you up. This means that if there's any trap placed on the enemy's side, all he has to do is just walk on it and the trap is broken and removed. In the armor department, he is definitely packing just a little bit more armor than his predecessor will, as a natural upgrade would, but his armor is still relatively healthy all the same. His head at just packing about 30-50, his arms at about 30-49, and 32, about just shy of 3,300 there as well, and his legs at about 3,500 means he's got a moderately healthy HP pool, so when fully raised, he can definitely take a hit moderately well, at first glance. But if you do look at the stats on his legs, that's where he does kind of trip up a little bit. A base mobility of 704 isn't actually too bad, that middle cusp of where you want a good biped leg to be before any other bonuses. He can support up to 2 heavy parts, which also is a very good addition, but his resist stats are kind of all over the place though. A melee resist of 1050 isn't too shabby. I'd say he'd be taking just relatively decent or expected damage from incoming melee fighters, but he is packing a shoot resist of 562, which is definitely not great. This means while up close and personal, he can probably hold his own one or two times. When it comes to taking pot shots from afar, these will down him faster than the guy at McDonald's. He does, however, have an evade of 679, which also isn't great either. But since he is packing a lot of relatively heavy weight and heavy hammers, evading really isn't something that he really had in mind from the get-go. All this being said, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Buster-Tyranno a pretty flat 5 out of 10, and essentially kind of a bargain bin, middle-of-the-road kind of bot. That's not to say that he's bad or has terrible stats. His leg stats are definitely kind of all over the place as mentioned, but if in instances where you do need a full AoE attack like a hammer, and you need something that's relatively cheap and moderately easy to raise, you really don't have to look much farther than Buster-Tyranno, because as a member of the Friend Point Gacha pool, anybody can snag him moderately easy. However, on the flip side of that, because he does start as a 1-star model, he will be moderately expensive to raise once you get him beyond rank 3. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him very equally at a 5 out of 10, for these very same reasons. While as a bargain bin model, he can definitely do the job moderately well, he's definitely also a model that you don't really want to main in particular unless you are really, really attached to him, because his resist stats are kind of a mess, he has very low evade, his mobility isn't too shabby, but even if Melt and Hammer do have decent synergy together for when it comes to AoE damage, if someone is using Stat Cleanse on the enemy side, that kind of negates half the reason Buster-Tyranno would be on the field anyway. Plus, with both his arms being an AoE attack, being your main source of damage dealing is most certainly not in Buster-Tyranno's interest.